In this video, we will discuss Hinduism as a living tradition. When we talk about the Hindu religious tradition, there are a few core beliefs that are common to most Hindus. The first of these is Dharma. We've discussed this a bit when we talked about Hinduism and its ancient origins. But Dharma is the idea of one's duty or right action. Dharma often is associated with the caste system and what one is supposed to do in one's life. With the idea of reincarnation, each incarnation of a spirit or a soul person should have some kind of dharma that's unique to that situation. Achieving this dharma is one of the ways that one can get out of the cycle of birth and rebirth, which we'll talk about in a moment. We also see the idea of karma in Hinduism. Karma in Hinduism as a religious idea is not quite what we think of today in modern practices of what comes around goes around. Rather, the idea of karma in Hinduism begins as this idea that every action has some kind of consequence and result for an individual person. This is often related to the idea of dharma as well as the cycle of reincarnation. And the cycle is samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth and rebirth that continues throughout the life of one's soul or spirit until they achieve moksha or enlightenment. And moksha is when the soul or spirit is released from the cycle of birth and rebirth. We also have the idea of Atman. When we talk about the soul or spirit, we're talking about this idea of self, which is what Atman means. And in Hinduism, we have a focus on not necessarily self in a selfish way, but rather on what one needs to do relating to dharma and karma to achieve moksha and make it through this cycle of birth and rebirth called samsara. In modern Hinduism, which still has some ancient origins, we see some particular rituals and practices. We've talked about this a bit when we talked about the historical tradition, but bhakti, or devotion to specific gods and goddesses, is essential to understanding Hinduism as a tradition. For many Hindus, this bhakti is what helps them achieve their dharma, or their religious duty, and find their way out of samsara to achieve moksha. Bhakti takes many forms, and as you can see in the picture here, often goes along with sacrifice, prayer, and just general devotion to a deity. We also see puja. In Hinduism, puja is worship, literally, and is a worship service that often involves bhakti and involves prayer, sometimes music, meditation, yoga, and so on. We see in Hinduism different mantras, and mantras, while we have these in modern secular culture, have an even more religious and spiritual aspect in Hinduism. When we think of a mantra, we typically think of some kind of good saying that can realign our ideas or give us some kind of peace or purpose. And in Hinduism, this is very much the case, but it takes on a more spiritual aspect. Just like we saw with the divine sound Om, we see that mantras have a purpose. There is some kind of connection between specific mantras and either the deities or connection to the universe. That these mantras, saying these specific words, and typically in Sanskrit or Tamil, have some kind of transformative power in one's life. We also see yoga as a religious practice in Hinduism. Again, this is something that we've seen adapted in modern secular culture, as an exercise. But in Hinduism, this takes on a religious aspect, much like the mantras. Yoga is focused on the idea of meditation and bringing oneself to full mindfulness and consciousness with what's going on within them and their connection to the spiritual, or gods and goddesses. In modern secular culture, or even other religions, Hinduism is often considered infamous for its amount of deities. By some counts, there are 33,000 deities in Hinduism. What's important to understand with this is that the deities are not necessarily separate entities. There are, in some cases, separate deities, gods and goddesses who have different roles, but many of the gods and goddesses that we see are actually incarnations or manifestations of different gods. In Hinduism, there are typically three major gods called the Trimurti, and the Trimurti are some kind of trinity that typically go together as one whole, but still have their separate roles. Vishnu is the protector god, and Vishnu is, which we'll talk about later, often incarnated as Krishna and worshipped that way. Alongside Vishnu is Shiva, who's the destroyer god. Now, Shiva is not necessarily worshipped as an evil destroyer, but rather somebody who transforms. And Brahma is worshipped as a creator god. The Trimurti are important for understanding the typical Hindu religious tradition, because these three gods are seen as typically the chief gods. We have the creator, Brahma, Vishnu, who protects the creation, and Shiva, who transforms the creation, all working together in different capacities. When we talk about branches of Hinduism, we are not really talking about breaks in the tradition based on understandings of texts or heresy like we do in Christianity and Islam and Judaism. Rather, we see different branches that focus on the worship of a specific deity. As we've seen in ancient religious traditions, while there's polytheism where multiple gods and goddesses are worshipped, we usually see that one god or goddess is the chief of all the other ones, at least for a particular community or an individual. The largest branch of Hinduism today is Vaishnavism. Vaishnavism is focused on the worship of Vishnu, the protector god. Vishnu is often worshipped in his incarnation as Krishna, who is the blue-skinned god, sometimes portrayed as an infant or a young boy, who you can see here on the right. Vishnu is often associated with compassion and protection, which makes him a very popular god that Hindus worship. He's typically worshipped along with his consort, who ends up being kind of like a wife, named Lakshmi. And the couple is often depicted as sitting on a giant snake with multiple heads. And this represents the ocean that is the universe. Vishnu, even though he's not the creator god in the Trimurti, is usually worshipped by most Vaishnavites as the creator and the beginning and end of everything. If you see a particularly religious Hindu today with 3 stripes vertically on their forehead, this is the mark of a Vaishnava. The second largest branch of Hinduism is Shaivism, which is focused on the worship of Shiva, the destroyer god. Now, even though Shiva as the destroyer can seem like a difficult god to worship, remember that the destruction is not so much destroying things created as much as transforming them to a different state. He's not malicious, but rather a beneficent transformer in the universe. Like we see in Vaishnavism, Shaivas believe that Shiva was the one who created everything instead of Brahma. Shiva is often worshipped alongside his wife, Parvati, and his son, who is the elephant-headed god, Ganesha. Shiva is often portrayed with a third eye, which you can see on the image here. And in modern Hinduism, when you see somebody who's a Shaiva, they will have 3 horizontal stripes in their forehead with a noticeable dot in the middle to portray the third eye. Worship of Shiva often takes the form of meditation and walking the midway between renunciation and being part of the material world. Shiva's third eye is important for portraying his look at his inward self and the idea of quote-unquote pure consciousness. So Shaivas are focused on this inward reflection of self and how that helps them function in the material world. While Vaishnavism and Shaivism are the major branches of Hinduism with the most adherents, we often see Hindus who are part of Shaktism. And Shaktism focuses on bhakti, or devotion, to Devi, who is the great goddess. Devi is sometimes called Shakti, which is where we get the name for this tradition from. And Devi is typically seen as the important goddess of Hinduism. Shakti, or Devi, is often portrayed as the consort of Shiva, and in the picture you can see on the right hand here, she's standing on top of Shiva. We see in some way a play on words as Shiva becomes Shava, which means corpse. And Devi is the one who protects the world. In her story, she was created in order to kill a demon who was terrorizing the universe and other deities, but was unable to be killed by a man. So Shakti, or Devi, was created as a woman who would be able to do this work. Her femininity and womanness are essential for understanding her, as well as essential for understanding the role of women in Hinduism as important alongside the male Hindu. Shakti is often worshipped in the form of Kali, which is the picture you see on the right hand here. In Shaktism, Devi, Shakti, Kali, whomever the incarnation we talk about is often understood as Brahman. So you remember when we talked about the historical roots of this tradition, Brahman is the ultimate reality, or creator god, and in Shaktism, Devi is understood to be this ultimate reality. The final major branch of Hinduism that we see is Smartism. This gets its name from the Smriti, which, as you remember when we talked about the religious scriptures of this tradition, are the remembered texts, the texts that are mythology and epics, such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. While Smartas focus on devotion and worship of deities, their primary focus is on scholarly study of these texts that make up the Smriti. And Smartas are only upper class people in the caste system. The deities that they primarily worship are called the Pankayatana Puja, which literally means 5 shrines worship. And these include the gods Vishnu, Shiva, Shakti or Devi, Ganesha, and Surya. And Surya is the sun god who is the father of Manu, and Manu is considered the first human. In Smritism, even though these 5 deities are worshipped, typically Shiva is the one who is most worshipped among the 5, probably because of this emphasis on meditation and introspection. In the last couple centuries, one of the main ideas we see in modern Hinduism is a focus on nonviolence. In Hinduism, this is called ahimsa, which is literally a focus on not doing harm to any human, animal, plant, or any other life form. We see this emphasized as far back as the Bhagavad Gita, where we see Arjuna struggling with Krishna about his role in the war and wanting to withdraw because of the violence. This doesn't mean that every Hindu is nonviolent, or that Hinduism, even as an entire religious tradition, is nonviolent. But we do see this theme run throughout modern Hinduism. This is often where we see the idea of vegetarianism, focusing on not eating animals and only eating plants, because of the idea of ahimsa and not wanting to harm anything without just cause. How Hindus take the idea of ahimsa differs from person to person and community to community. For some, ahimsa means not being violent without a cause. So when we talk about Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, there was an emphasis on nonviolence, except that Arjuna had a cause, that he had to participate in this war to enact his dharma. For others, the idea of ahimsa means a blanket statement of never being violent towards anyone or anything. One of the key figures that we see in the last couple centuries who demonstrates ahimsa is Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi's understanding of ahimsa was very thorough. Gandhi believed that one should not be violent to any human, toward any animal, and even towards many plants. Gandhi would eat, as a vegetarian, plants only, but would only eat enough to survive on. So overeating was completely out of the question because it would cause more harm than was necessary. Gandhi lived at a time when the British Empire ruled India in the late 19th century through the early and mid 20th century. And because of this rule and India's desire for independence, there was a lot of warfare taking place. Gandhi's voice was particularly unique because his voice was the one who pushed for nonviolent resistance toward the government, towards politics, and towards warfare. Gandhi embodied the idea of ahimsa and was respected in not only Hinduism but other religious traditions and secularism. He was given the name Mahatma, which means venerable. So when you see Mahatma Gandhi, this simply means Venerable Gandhi, whereas his first name was Mohandas. Gandhi became an inspiration for other nonviolent resistors later, including Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. There are several major important holidays in Hinduism that we see celebrated in the United States as well as around the world. The first of these is Diwali, which is the Festival of Lights. Diwali is often associated with the goddess Lakshmi, who is the goddess of prosperity and wealth. There are different versions of the history of Diwali. One associates it with the goddess Lakshmi and her marriage to Vishnu, while others associate Diwali with the epic Ramayana as the day when Rama defeats Ravana and essentially brings light into the world. Holi is another important Hindu holiday. It's often a festival of colors or considered a festival of love. Like Diwali, there are various different interpretations of the origins of Holi. One of these is the idea of light defeating darkness, or good defeating evil. And it's associated with the story of a king who wanted everybody to worship him, but his son decided to worship Vishnu instead. Eventually, this led to a lot of contention between the two, and Vishnu stepped in and saved them from the king who had wanted everybody to worship him. Holi is especially associated with Vishnu and his incarnation as Krishna, and this is where we see the idea of the Festival of Colors. In one story, Krishna, as a youthful boy, wanted to make his consort colorful like him, and would decorate her with various colors just like he had blue skin. So this is one of the ways that we see the play on colors and the play on love come into the holiday of Holi. Janmashtami is often called Krishna Janmashtami and is the celebration of the birth of Krishna, who is the incarnation of Vishnu. This holiday, along with Ganesh Jayatani, which is Ganesh's birthday, are both celebrated by bhakti or devotion to the gods that they celebrate. Vishnu is celebrated in his incarnation as Krishna with devotion, prayer, mantras, sacrifices, and so on, as is Ganesh or Ganesha in Ganesh Jayatani. And we see that for Ganesh, who is understood as the god of wisdom, there is a focus on introspection and wisdom as well as just general celebration. One of the other major holidays we see in Hinduism is Navaratri. Navaratri is associated with multiple different stories, but generally the 10-day celebration celebrates good triumphing over evil. We typically see it celebrated with a focus on Devi or Shakti, this great goddess, and in one of her manifestations as Durga, achieved victory over the demon with the buffalo head who is terrorizing the universe. We also see this associated with the victory of Rama over the demon king Ravana in the Ramayana. Whatever the origin or the focus of the Hindu in Navaratri, the idea is still the same, that good will always triumph over evil. And the holiday is celebrated a lot with dancing and general celebration. Now that we have reached the end of this video, you should be able to identify and describe the main beliefs and rituals of most Hindus, describe the main branches of Hinduism and distinguish among them, explain the importance of Gandhi to Hinduism, and identify and describe various Hindu holidays that are celebrated in the 21st century.